For most of the 20th century, a single type of engine powered the warships, the power stations, and the industrial infrastructure of the entire developed world. By the mid-1950s, it had vanished from everyday life. Diesel replaced it on the railroads, modern propulsion took over at sea, and the public came to see it as a relic of the Victorian age. At least, that's what everyone thought. That engine still generates roughly half of all the electricity produced on Earth, and more of them are spinning right now than at any point in human history. That engine is the steam turbine, and the story of how it became the invisible backbone of modern civilization begins with a single machine built in northern England in 1884. A British engineer named Charles Parsons constructed the first practical multi-stage steam turbine in Gateshead, England, and coupled it to a small dynamo that generated just 7.5 kilowatts of electricity, barely enough to light a few homes. The machine spun at 18,000 revolutions per minute and worked by expanding steam through a series of blades in stages, solving a problem that had defeated engineers for decades, which was how to harness steam that moves at over 1,700 miles per hour and convert it into smooth, usable rotary power. The basic principle Parsons demonstrated that year has not changed since. Use heat to boil water into steam, push the steam through turbine blades to spin a shaft, and connect that shaft to a generator. The original machine now sits in the Science Museum in London, and the museum itself describes it as the forerunner of the turbine generators that today provide most of the world's electricity. Before Parsons, the earliest central power stations relied on a completely different approach. Thomas Edison's Pearl Street Station in New York and the Holborn Viaduct Station in London, both opened in 1882, used reciprocating piston steam engines to generate electricity. Those piston engines worked, but they were slow, limited in scale, and shook themselves apart under sustained operation. By roughly 1905, the steam turbine had entirely replaced them in almost all large power stations because it delivered smooth rotary motion at high speed, scaled to enormous sizes, and was far more efficient at converting heat into usable power. Seattle's Georgetown Steam Plant, which used Curtiss turbines between 1906 and 1917, is recognized by the American Society of Mechanical Engineers as the landmark that marks the beginning of the end for the reciprocating steam engine in power generation. Within Parsons' own lifetime, the steam turbine capacity scaled from that original 7.5 kilowatts to 50,000 kilowatts, a roughly 10,000-fold increase in a single human generation. But Parsons was not the type of engineer who waited for the world to come to him. In 1897, at Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee Naval Review at Spithead, he pulled one of the greatest publicity stunts in engineering history. Parsons drove his steam turbine-powered vessel, Turbinia, uninvited through the assembled fleet of the Royal Navy at over 34 knots, outrunning every warship the Admiralty sent to chase it down. The assembled naval officers watched a small, unannounced civilian boat humiliate the largest navy on the planet, and that single demonstration changed the trajectory of naval engineering almost overnight. Within 9 years, that demonstration reshaped naval warfare entirely. In 1906, the British Royal Navy launched HMS Dreadnought, the first major battleship to use Parsons' steam turbines instead of the old reciprocating piston engines that powered every other warship in existence. Dreadnought could sustain 21 knots, giving it a 3-knot advantage over any rival, which was enough to control the range of any engagement, close on a retreating enemy, or stay safely out of the torpedo range. The old piston engines could not reach those speeds, and they vibrated so severely that the optical rangefinders used for aiming could not function properly. The turbines ran smoothly, the vibration vanished, and Dreadnought made every other battleship in every other navy on Earth instantly obsolete, including, ironically, the rest of the British fleet. From that moment forward, every major warship was classified as either a dreadnought or a pre-dreadnought. Steam turbines became the standard propulsion system for warships for the next half-century and beyond. During the Second World War, every battleship, aircraft carrier, cruiser, and destroyer in the Allied and Axis fleets ran on steam turbines. And even nuclear-powered warships today still use them, because the nuclear reactor is just a different way of boiling the water. Then, in the decades following the Second World War, steam disappeared from the surface of daily life in a way that felt sudden and total. North American railroads retired roughly 90% of their steam locomotives by the mid-1950s, and steam was virtually gone from mainline rail service by 1960. Diesel-electric locomotives replaced them because they were about 6 times more thermally efficient, converting around 36% of their fuel energy into useful work compared to a steam locomotive's miserable 6%. Steamships gave way to diesel engines and gas turbines on the open ocean. To the general public, the age of steam was finished, filed away alongside horse-drawn carriages and telegraph offices. What nobody seemed to notice was that behind the walls of power plants, steam turbines were not just surviving, they were becoming more dominant than ever. The reason steam locomotives died is the exact same reason steam turbines in power stations thrived. And that reason is efficiency. A steam locomotive wasted roughly 94% of its fuel's energy, which is catastrophic by any engineering standard. But a modern ultra-supercritical coal plant converts 45 to 47% of its fuel energy into electricity, and combined cycle natural gas plants, which pair a combustion turbine with a steam turbine to capture waste heat, push past 60% efficiency, with some installations exceeding 64%, according to Siemens Energy. Those are the most efficient fossil fuel power plants ever constructed. The efficiency gains come from pushing steam to extreme conditions, with pressures above 3,200 pounds per square inch and temperatures exceeding 600 degrees Celsius. At those conditions, water no longer boils in the traditional sense, but instead passes through what physicists call the critical point, where the boundary between liquid and gas simply ceases to exist and the water becomes a supercritical fluid. The single most important thing to understand about the steam turbine is that it is completely indifferent to where its heat comes from. Whether you burn coal, split uranium atoms in a nuclear reactor, burn natural gas, tap geothermal heat from deep underground, concentrate sunlight with fields of mirrors in a desert, or burn wood and agricultural waste. The final step in generating electricity is identical. Make steam, spin a turbine, turn a generator. That is why the same fundamental machine Charles Parsons built in 1884 sits at the heart of coal plants, nuclear plants, natural gas combined cycle plants, geothermal facilities, biomass stations, and concentrated solar power installations on every inhabited continent. Nuclear power provides perhaps the most vivid illustration of this principle in action, because a nuclear reactor is, in mechanical terms, an extraordinarily sophisticated way to boil water. The fission process generates intense heat. That heat converts water into steam, and the steam drives a turbine connected to a generator. Strip away the reactor, and you are looking at the same machine Parsons demonstrated over 140 years ago. Nuclear energy generated roughly 9% of global electricity in 2024 and reached an all-time high output of approximately 2,800 terawatt-hours in 2025. And here is the detail that makes the pattern inescapable. Even nuclear fusion, the most futuristic energy technology humanity is currently pursuing, will still end the same way. Fusion will generate extreme heat. That heat will boil water, and that steam will spin turbine blades connected to a generator, following the exact same endpoint Parsons demonstrated 140 years ago. The largest steam turbine currently built for nuclear service is the Arabelle, produced by Arabelle Solutions, and each unit generates 1,770 megawatts of electricity. The Arabelle is physically longer than an Airbus A380 jumbo jet and produces roughly 236,000 times more power than Parsons' original 1884 machine. The engineering has improved beyond anything Parsons could have conceived, but the underlying idea is exactly the same. When you look at the global electricity landscape in 2024 and 2025, the numbers make the pattern unmistakable. Coal generated about 34% of the world's electricity, natural gas about 22%, nuclear about 9%, hydropower roughly 14%, and wind and solar together roughly 16 to 18%. When you add up coal, nuclear, the steam turbine portion of combined cycle gas plants, geothermal, biomass, and concentrated solar, steam turbines still account for on the order of half of all electricity generated on Earth. For most of the 20th century, that figure was likely above 80%, because the only major alternative was hydroelectric dams. What has shifted is the explosive growth of wind turbines and solar photovoltaic panels, technologies that bypass steam entirely by converting wind and sunlight directly into electricity with no boiling water involved. In 2025, for the first time in over a century, renewables collectively generated more electricity than coal globally, with renewables reaching about 33.8% of the mix, while coal dropped to roughly 33%. That is a significant milestone, and it signals a gradual decline in steam's share of global generation for the first time in the technology's history. But even as renewables scale, steam turbine demand is surging in one of the last places anyone would have predicted. The artificial intelligence revolution, the defining technology story of the 2020s, is driving an unprecedented wave of electricity consumption that steam turbines will help meet. The average AI data center already draws as much electricity as 100,000 homes, and the largest facilities under construction will consume 20 times that. The International Energy Agency projects that global electricity generation for data centers will more than double from 460 terawatt-hours in 2024 to over 1,000 terawatt-hours by 2030, and natural gas and coal together are expected to supply over 40% of that additional demand. 3 Mile Island, the Pennsylvania nuclear plant that became synonymous with America's worst nuclear accident in 1979, is being restarted specifically to feed Microsoft's AI data centers, with Constellation Energy investing $1.6 billion to bring the facility back online under a 20-year power purchase agreement. Amazon acquired a massive campus adjacent to the Susquehanna nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania for roughly $650 million. Oracle has disclosed plans for a 1 gigawatt nuclear-powered data center. The most futuristic industry on the planet is building its foundation on top of the steam turbine. There is also a cost to running civilization on steam that almost never enters the public conversation about energy. Steam turbines require enormous volumes of water to produce steam, and even more to cool and condense that steam back into liquid so it can be recycled through the system again. In the United States, thermoelectric power plants represent the single largest category of water withdrawals in the entire country, larger even than agriculture, pulling roughly 103 billion gallons per day. A solar panel uses essentially zero water to generate electricity, and a wind turbine uses none, which is one of the less discussed but genuinely important reasons the transition toward renewables matters beyond carbon emissions alone. Which brings us to the detail that closes the circle. In September of 2024, the United Kingdom, the country where Charles Parsons built that first turbine and where this entire story began, shut down its last coal-fired power station, becoming one of the first major economies to leave coal behind entirely. But that same year, global coal-fired electricity generation hit an all-time record of roughly 10,700 terawatt-hours, driven by record heat waves across China and India, pushing cooling demand to new highs. Even as coal's share of the global mix declines, the absolute volume of coal being burned has never been higher, which means more steam turbines are turning right now, at this very moment, than at any other point in human history. When engineers first started trying to build better steam engines in the 1700s, the ambition was to make steam push something, and every generation built on the work of the one before it. James Watt improved the condensing engine, Richard Trevithick put steam power on iron rails, and Charles Parsons finally solved the last piece of the puzzle by making it spin at high speed. And that spinning, steam-pushing blades in a turbine connected to a generator remains the single most common method by which humanity converts heat into electricity. The fuels have changed over the decades, and the materials have advanced beyond anything those original engineers could have recognized, but the core principle of boiling water and using the steam to turn a shaft is identical to what Parsons demonstrated in a workshop in northern England 142 years ago. The engine that the world thought it retired in the 1950s is still the invisible foundation holding up modern civilization. And we are still, when you strip everything else away, a species that boils water.